Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Primetime Preview Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and I am joined once again after a long time by Nick Merriam at Nick with Sports on Twitter or X. I can't say I can't do it. It just sounds like I'm promoting an OnlyFans. I won't do it. I'm not committing. It's going to be a while. It's going to take me longer than remembering to say the Commanders or Washington football team or whatever. Whew, man, it's good to have you back. How you doing?
Doing good. I just pop in when the season starts. Apparently, that's the thing now. 2 in a row like that. It's been, for those who don't know, like I'm in the depths of college football now, and it's an interesting experience. There's a lot of hands-on stuff, but so it's lots going on all the time, at all times. There's really no stopping, even, late at night. So
it seems like we've all found ways to make ourselves outlandishly busy, but football brings us back together and we find time. So I'm stoked. We are going to talk about the rookies that we're excited about, and we'll be joined by Owen McCullor very shortly. We're going to bring him on. And after that, Nick and I are going to give a little preview for the Thursday night football game between the Vikings and the Eagles. So that will be the second half. That's going to take us basically right up to game time. So for those of you watching, we will have the rookie segment added on to the podcast episode that'll be later tonight. I will be doing a post-game show with Coach Kevin Spencer, longtime NFL coach. We'll be doing a recap of the show. Then I'll have Andrew Catlin on, and he's going to be talking about his artificial intelligence that he built for game predictions, and he'll be writing about those week to week as the season progresses on DefiantTakesFootball.com as well. And then Matthew Brown for some fantasy chatter as well. So that will all be both live tonight after the game as well as in a podcast episode. Our rookie chat will be tagged on to the end of that just so that it all makes sense for y'all. But that being said, we have limited time before the game begins, so let's welcome Owen McCullor to the stage. Owen, you are... Okay. Can you see us, Owen? Looks like we are... Oh, okay, so I should say this, and I don't think this is on my end, but I am having storms here at the moment. So I am a little concerned. We desperately need the water here in Texas, but I'm a little concerned about my connection. I don't think that the issue with Owen here is on my end. So I guess we'll have him back here in just a minute. But that being said, the first player that we wanted to talk about today was Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson. And so that was a player that you had in mind that you wanted to kind of talk about a little bit. And so we have him with 24 of 37, 223 yards passing, a touchdown and interception. And then, of course, his rushing threat as well for 40 yards and a touchdown. So pretty impactful, certainly from a statistical, the most impactful rookie quarterback, to be sure. And he looked very naturally athletic out there, that's for sure. So what did you what inspired you to want to talk about Richardson today?
Well, I thought after preseason he was going to be the quarterback that kind of had the best. Like I would take him to be the offensive rookie of the year. Everyone's taking Bijan because he's like, the easy pick. I'm zigging when people are zagging, but it's this set up so well for him right now to just immediately be the type of player he was in college here in Indiana, or not here, but in Indianapolis, because of the offense that they're running with Steichen, right? It is the same offense that Hurts ran last year. And I think a lot of the things that they've put in for Richardson immediately was easy for him to kind of adapt to through preseason, getting a bunch of reps, doing the RPOs, running the ball, getting his eyes on these kind of quick game developing routes. And then if he need, when he's coming off of these RPOs, throwing these kind of downfield, breaking off routes at times too. And then you saw that give the Colts a chance against a good Jacksonville team, who I thought looked better defensively than I would have expected. Because of the way Richardson played. He didn't skip a beat here going straight into the league. Everyone's talking about early on how he's a developmental guy. He's a great athlete. We'll see if he can really capture that. And I think he was more Cam Newton week 1 than he was Josh Allen week 1 of his rookie season, right? We kind of saw the traits in action immediately. There was no like, oh God, the accuracy is a problem, and he needs some time and decision making. Oh, he didn't look like a rookie, and that is the best possible scenario for this type of prospect that Indianapolis could have. I don't know that they're talented enough to make a playoff run. They're definitely not better than Jacksonville. They didn't beat them, but I do think they're going to have a fun season. They're going to win more games than people think. They could be the second best team in that division because there's a little bit of talent there. And when you have a quarterback who is capable of these just superhuman athletic feats, there will be games where they play a team that's way better than them, and he just has this statistical output that we haven't seen yet from any player. And we'll be talking about it for like a month, and maybe it'll be week 7 and they'll play the Titans or something and they win by like 50. And we're like, oh my God, like if that guy ever shows up for a full season, they're winning the Super Bowl. Right. And I think if you're a Colts fan, you have to feel just very, very good right now about your quarterback situation. Not that the Texans and Panthers shouldn't, but I think what we initially thought would have been, a quicker learning curve for those guys, because of the simplicity of the offense they're running here with Richardson, it might be the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, before I jump in on that, let's bring Owen to the stage. Owen, we have you. How you doing?
Better now that I'm all good and set. It was weird. I was looking fine in the backstage area, and all of a sudden I got pulled on, and everything went down. So I'm glad to be back on and actually seen now.
Technology, man, it is what it is. But so look, Owen does the Weekly Huddle podcast and YouTube channel. He also writes for us at Defiant Takes Football, and of course he did plenty of the video breakdowns with us for the draft prospects as well, pre-draft. So I'm excited to have you back on, talk about what we're seeing out of some of these guys. Just to briefly touch on Richardson, I think the biggest thing, aside from just the pure athleticism, where he actually genuinely does just look like a better athlete than everybody else out there when you take the size into account. And he can see throwing lanes so easily. I mean, his length, he can throw the ball from any angle. It looks natural, but he just looks very poised. He doesn't look like he's afraid to get hit. Size probably helps, but the accuracy, like you said, it's on point, even from varied arm angles. So, the only thing that I do wonder about is the quality of playmaker around him right now. And they took Josh Downs, which I'm very happy about. And I didn't know how that was immediately going to translate into their offense. But he was getting touches and he was making plays. And I just wonder what it looks like over the course of a full season, when teams get more tape, when some more talented defenses go up against him. And like you said, I don't think they're a playoff team. But I think early returns after just 1 week have got to be good. Now, just because we are looking to kind of keep on time with everything, I want to jump into our next rookie here, which is going to be Bijan Robinson, or Bijan, I believe is pronounced. Now I understand. So Falcons take him very early in the draft. He goes for about 56 yards rushing, also with a few receptions for 27 yards and a touchdown as well. And my God, I mean, if you saw the touchdown, it was pretty wild. So, Owen, you wanted to talk about Bijan today and wax poetically a little bit. So what inspired you to do so?
Yeah, there was some confusion when he was drafted as high as he was by the Falcons, because were coming off a season where they had a rookie rush for 1,000 yards with Tyler Algier. And we saw Algier get some touches today, to the detriment of my sleeper fantasy team, where he went off a little bit and got some early, especially earlier in the game, he got some touches where Bijan we would expected him to get more of the workload, especially being such a high draft pick. And while I was never the biggest fan of Algier in college, I felt like he did perform well last year, and he continued to this year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance them going forward in the season. But with when we finally did start to see Robinson get more touches and be active in the game, there was a lot of times that you just felt like he couldn't be tackled for loss, that they weren't absolutely blowing the play up before he could even get the ball. It was like a pitch play and a little short pass before he could even get his feet set that he was getting knocked down. Everything else just looked way more explosive, and he looked like the clear better athlete between the two running backs that they have there, which is why they probably grabbed him. And he just looked like Texas Bijan immediately. And yeah, that one touchdown he scored, it was a little kind of wide receiver screen pass out to the boundary. and he makes a established NFL linebacker, and I think it's Luvu for the Panthers, miss, and then splits two more defenders and is able to get into the end zone. So, I mean, you see that elusiveness, especially for a bigger guy like he is, and he has the athleticism. He was able to hit the outside in a couple plays and really showed just more patience and just looked like a veteran already out there, even though he's kind of a younger guy in the after in his rookie year in his first start.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen anything yet as far as the athleticism. What did you think about his performance?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they didn't feature him as much as they did early on. I think that's they're trying to use him in different ways before they like give him 20 carries, right? So I thought that the plan with Atlanta was like, we're gonna give him a bubble screen, we're gonna get him on a normal running back screen, we're gonna give him an inside zone, we're gonna give him a pitch play, like just get him kind of used to all the things he'll be doing in the offense before we fully invest in him as like our primary weapon. If he ends up being that, I assume he will be at some point. I still think Algier will have a role because I think this is an offense that just wants to run outside zone over and over again as it was last year. But I think the problem with the running back position is you just haven't seen guys who are so athletic that they can't be tackled anymore in the NFL because everybody else has gotten more athletic. And Saquon was close to that, but not really a guy where it's like, oh, he makes a guy miss, and it's pretty cool when it happens, but it's like 1 every 5 runs. This guy might do it like every 3 runs, and it's just that's different, and it might bring some credence to his value in this offense more than other backs we've seen, just because this is a game we've been playing of years of like, how do you find value in this position, right? And one of the ones you haven't seen is that, like, oh, he's 220 pounds and he looks like he's 190 when he moves, because it's generally either 190 and can fly or 250 and you're Derrick Henry, and there's nothing in between that's like, oh, that guy deserves to be a 10-year player. It will be a 10-year player. Like, it just doesn't, the way they play doesn't last. This guy, barring like knee issues, like, it seems to be there.
Yeah, well, I think it's like, I mean, Saquon has this to some degree, and he's certainly explosive, he's big, he's powerful, but it's the joystick maneuverability. I mean, he looks like Zay Flowers out there, but who we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But he can move forward, back, side to side with almost no loss of speed. It's pretty crazy, and he also is a phenomenal receiver as well. So I really do think that he is going to become heavily involved. But I think we're seeing a trend across the NFL with a lot of these highly drafted rookies. They're not being forced in a full-time role. So aside from the fact that almost nobody uses a single lead back at this point, it just seems like teams all across the league are really taking their time, even with those highly drafted first-round rookies, which is a great segue because Jack Campbell, the Lions linebacker, was taken later in the first round, a guy I was really high on. And honestly, aside from just positional value itself, probably could have gone even higher, right? 2 total tackles, 1 solo tackle, 1 pass breakup. So he didn't exactly light up the stat sheet, but he didn't play a full-time role either. He subbed out quite a bit. They have Malcolm Rodriguez and Anzalone, I forget what his first name is, Alex Anzalone. And so they kind of cycled through those 3 guys as their primary linebackers in the opener on Thursday night against the Chiefs. But I thought that when Campbell was in there, he played really well. He was very stout against the run, not just in tackling, because obviously he didn't have a ton of tackles, but taking on linebacker or offensive linemen and holding the point or whatever it is that he needed to do. Block.
I don't know if he's going to still be heard on the stream or not. We'll talk a little bit about Jack Campbell while we're back. To be honest with you, because I dropped out of the draft, I think I had him linebacker 1. I'm not certain. I know that he was a guy that when I initially watched him, I was concerned about the stoutness, which he mentioned. The cover skills and like from a mic position specifically were unique. It was the thing that stood out. You don't really find those guys too often. But I think there's something to be said now that he's in the NFL that like stoutness might not be as difficult coming from like Iowa to the NFL as you'd think, just because of the offenses they play against, where it's like there are two fullbacks on the field and neither of them's getting the ball. Like they're just trying to sledgehammer you. Like, and that's not every opponent in the Big Ten, but it's a little bit of a different mindset approaching those games, I think, when you're a Mike linebacker who's being told to kind of think about all the possible outcomes, and that's like the usual one, but not the only one. Whereas in the NFL, like you're very much expecting like the passing game to be the lead for most offenses, especially Kansas City.
I think that's why he didn't get as much time on the field as you might have expected from somebody drafted as high as he was, because they were going against Kansas City. And even if he did show some more of that rare pass defense from a guy his size playing at his position, it's really a big jump from playing against some of the Big Ten offenses that he was able to perform well in pass coverage with, than going to Kansas City, who is more of a primary pass option with the best quarterback in the league kind of thing. So they probably didn't want to expose him too quickly and just wanted to kind of slowly work him in and allow him to do what he does best. And allow those other guys who have been in the league now for at least a year, who are more experienced with that and have experience playing against these more high power passing offenses, to get those reps as they slowly worked him in and gave him tape to look at with himself in there.
I don't know if Max is frozen or if he's just staring. I can't tell.
I think he might be frozen again.
Frozen again. All right. Let's move on. So you had who was your next player? You had
I had Puka Nacua, the wide receiver for the Rams.
Right.
Yes,
I just watched.
I was a big fan of Puka when he was at BYU. He was formerly of Washington, which is the college team I personally cover a lot of. And he never really got an opportunity to play at Washington. He finally went to BYU, got some time to play, went from playing 3 and 4 games a season to 12 and 9, and really just showed how much of an athlete he was. They moved him around there and used him as like a designed quarterback for runs and things like that. And he was more of a deep threat, but they'd also get him involved in the screen game and stuff, which for a guy who's 6'1", pushing 6'2", and highly athletic, that's kind of impressive. Those are more of your shiftier slot guys who get those opportunities. So he went out there and he put up 119 yards for the Rams. And I think he tied with Tutu Atwell for a leader in receiving yards. And that's kind of impressive, especially when, coming out of offseason, the Rams are talking about how they had so many new guys that Matt Stafford had to get a book and remember everybody's name. He kind of felt like, even not as early on in the game as you'd expect, but moving later into the game, they were definitely more on the same page, hitting more of these deep crossing routes and having some more timing routes. Like they had a double move ending up in a corner route to the outside, or Stafford had him on a pretty good on the sideline. So you can start to see that Nakua's like athleticism and his abilities were starting to show up. And one of the things I said when I was covering him was that he is a great athlete, and if you can get the ball in his hands and utilize him well, he can give you early dividends. But some teams that are going to rely on him to be like a number 2 receiver, that's not really what his game is. He's not like the best route runner. He's not. He's kind of raw in that aspect, especially because he didn't play as much in college. So a team like the Rams, who can utilize him in more creative ways and just get the ball in his hands, is probably where the best place he could have landed in, and how he's paying off early because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys can hear me. I should just double check to see if you can hear me, because I lost power from the storm. So I'm running off of a hotspot off my phone. So as long as I'm actually here, then I'm good. But yeah, go ahead on Puka.
Yeah, I thought he was the closest thing to Debo we had seen like in college, and that's still like pretty far from what Debo is, which is why I didn't have him as like a first round prospect despite that. But his tape at BYU is a really interesting watch, because they used him in ways that you don't really see any receiver being used in college at all or in the NFL. It just it was different. It was kind of like Travis Kelce as your Wildcat QB-esque, while also let's scheme this guy touches from the receiver position, and he's also a deep threat, not really the guy that you're just throwing intermediate balls to and having the yards after the catch, even though he's a guy you're just trying to get his ball in his hands. And I didn't really see a whole lot of that extra stuff so far in LA, but what I think was surprising, other than the catch radius that he showed in college, was his awareness of space looked very good in this offense. And that could be like a coaching thing. I don't know if it's something that translated well from what he was doing in BYU. But he looks like Robert Woods in this offense, immediately. And I think that's a very good development for Sean McVay, who, needed kind of that guy who can run the basic over the top after you have Kupp kind of run this, shallow cross and or, beneath motion type thing to pull the defense the opposite way. And I think that it'll be very interesting to see how good this team is once Kupp is back, because I do think that the two of those players together is going to be a very good combination for LA.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think the consistency right off breaks was huge. You could just see that, like the hands, the timing, all look really, really impressive for a rookie in his first ever game. I will say he probably did not feel very good after taking 10 receptions, and a lot of it was relatively short. Like I think he only had one catch maybe where he ran out of bounds or something. I think most of them he was getting hit on. So that's a workload for a rookie to get used to. So I'm sure he's in the cold tub right now. But yeah, I mean, especially the final catch that he had along the sideline was very, very impressive. The wherewithal to get both feet down, to catch the ball, utilize length. And you didn't really see him creating separation, I thought, a ton. I think a lot of it was either schemed or just, Stafford getting him the ball in open zones as opposed to really route running or, burst to accelerate away from DBs. But he does have size and he has strength, and it looks like he can make receptions basically contested with no problem at the NFL level right now. So I don't know if he'll be going over 100 on a regular basis, but it's a great, great sign. So let's circle back, because I don't think I was gone long enough to miss the conversation on Zay Flowers. So we've got Zay Flowers, wide receiver with the Baltimore Ravens, out of Boston College, 9 receptions on 10 targets for 78 yards, 2 rushing attempts for 9 yards. And he looked literally exactly like I would have thought he would coming out of Boston College to be heavily used in an NFL offense, because he has work to do. He's already improved as a route runner, but he's definitely got work to do. But if you had a vision for him in which you were going to use him on screens, shallow passes, anything that you could do to get the ball in his hands on a regular basis, like if you knew what you wanted to do with that, then he was the player for you, because he's ultra reliable with his hands and very, very explosive. You could do anything at any time. I do worry a little bit about using him in super high volume, especially around the line of scrimmage where he's getting hit a lot, because he is a small dude. There was even one hit he took from behind when he was basically decelerating to try and make a move. He was tackled from the back, and I was like, ugh. But, it's the NFL, so you're going to take hits. But what is it that made you want to talk about him today, Nick?
Well, he was their best offensive weapon in week 1. And, in a game where they really didn't move the ball all that well, despite playing the Texans. Their defense did step up, I will say. But they just, I would have liked to see a little bit more from this Ravens offense with new pieces and Todd Monken and Odell Beckham Jr. there. Flowers, was kind of comped to Antonio Brown-ish in college because of his kind of all-around ability, along with that impressive yak ability that, he could be a very good punt returner if you wanted him to be, but he's not going to because he's too good at playing receiver. And I think that was kind of on display and has been on display throughout preseason, but Baltimore's not really using him as much of a downfield threat as they kind of, like Max talks about, like develop his route running ability, get him more accustomed to playing other positions receiver wise in the offense. And they're just finding ways to get on the ball. And he is making every touch worth it. He is another guy that, like Bijan, is kind of making someone miss, it seems, every time the ball gets in his hands. And that's very valuable. I think it's become like the thing in the NFL today is like, you are going to find ways to get guys in space, but they're going to ultimately either make a guy miss or not to turn a 4 or 5 yard gain into a 10, 12 yard gain. And if you have those guys, like that's very valuable. And the Ravens have been missing one of these guys, and they have one now. So, I think something that we see a lot in the Georgia offense with like Brock Bowers is they would take this guy lined up as like a wing tight end, and they bring him across the formation and just, block it up from a bunch of the opposite side, throwing the ball, and he would just kind of power his way upfield. With Flowers, you can kind of spread that out and do the same thing. And in space, he's just able to kind of, take these short beneath routes and, make him somebody miss, spin around another guy, sprint past another, and then have like just free range to run where he wants to. And I think so far it's worked well for them. They need to find other ways to kind of branch off of it just as an offense right now, because it might be the only thing they've been doing really well so far.
Yeah. We need to see them grow a little bit. What did you think of Zay Flowers in his debut?
Yeah, I was a little concerned when Zay Flowers was coming out because of his I did believe I had been following him since he was a sophomore in college, just watching Phil Dracovic, and then this guy caught my eye, so I've been keeping tabs on him for a while, and you can see the progression that his route running has gone through, especially at the college level. However, I still felt it was kind of like a question mark coming out, just because it was progressing well and got to a point where it was really good for the college game. I just felt like maybe that'd be kind of an issue early on in this game where he was going to struggle to separate purely on route running alone, and that he would have to be gimmick these kind of things like screens and touches in space to be able to get him to the rack opportunities. So I do think he did a great job at doing the stuff that he did well coming out. Like you grab him in the draft in the first round because he's a firecracker. He can make plays in the open field. He make guys miss. And now you're using to see that moving forward, now the teams are going to be focusing more on, okay, let's prevent this guy from getting these opportunities to, find the soft area in the zone. We need to put more focus on him and make the other guys make plays on this Ravens offense. If he's still going to be able to have this production with just trying to beat guys and get separation with route running instead of getting gimmicked open or just left alone on some plays as like the third read option in the passing scheme, just because the defense wasn't really keying on him as much early on.
Yeah, I think there are so many things that he does at a near elite level already that he's so worth a high pick if you have a plan for him, because with the amount of things he does well, there's a lot of trust that he's going to develop. I mean, elite effort already, elite hands already, elite ball tracking, I would say right off the bat, and then elite explosiveness and dynamicism on the field. So there's so many things to like about him, and we saw it all translate immediately. Like I said, I do worry a little bit about a super high volume in this style of usage, because he's going to be taking hits from linebackers. He's going to be taking hits from safeties. You know what I mean? He's not going to have a ton of times where he can run out of bounds either. I think he only had one touch that I recall where he got to run out of bounds versus taking a hit, and that was on the whole shot against Too High, which was, again, a beautiful example of ball tracking as it drops over his shoulder, catches it no problem. But just want to make sure that a guy his size stays healthy for the long haul, because he's definitely proven to be their best weapon. All right, so final player we're going to talk about today is Sam Laporta. He was my favorite tight end in the draft outside of Darnell Washington. They are distinctly different players, to be sure. And Laporta does bring a lot more in the receiving game right away. And I think the criticism with him from a lot of people was that he's not that great of a blocker. And I honestly felt like that was not really an accurate appraisal of him as a prospect. So, and I wanted to talk about him today because I felt like right away he's already showing some really nice ability as a blocker. So only 5 receptions for 39 yards, but that's every target he got, he caught, right? And looked really comfortable out there, consistent as a receiver. But I think the biggest and most exciting thing about him is that he was a dynamic blocker right away. Now, it wasn't perfect, but honestly, most tight ends aren't. And so what he did right away was really, really nice. He had a fantastic block on the touchdown run by Montgomery. The whole line did a phenomenal job blocking that play, but he came across the formation and he absolutely stopped Bolton in his tracks, and Montgomery was able to run right through. I just think that this guy is going to be one of the top tight ends in the NFL for a long time. Now, it's still, I'm not saying he's there right now, but I think he's, based on what I've seen so far, I think he's already the best. I haven't watched any tape really on Mayer yet, but based on what I have seen, I think he was the best week 1. So, guys, what do you think about Laporte? Am I too high on him already?
No, I don't think you are in terms of like the class, right? Not many other tight ends played. I think Darnell's hurt. Mayer didn't really get many snaps. He was just a blocker this week. Who else was
Kincaid had a couple. Kincaid had a couple dump offs and stuff like that, but he wasn't really the focal point of a passing attack this week.
Yeah. I think Dawson Knox still played a good amount for them. So, like, Laporta's being trusted, I think, more immediately. And I think we heard about that in the preseason. I could say I know for a fact that was a thing because of things I heard from Lions camp, like that he was being featured in certain aspects. They wanted him to eventually become a big role in the offense. There's a reason they took him 34th overall. It's almost a first-round pick. Like, they really like this kid. And I think, as this draft class has gone, like in terms of tight ends, I know Darnell Washington, like obviously is a very good blocker, but he was always kind of thought of as like this other type of player. A lot of the higher end guys outside of Kincaid, I think their blocking was a little overrated, especially like a Mayer. And I think Laporta was probably underrated a little bit in college just because, again, similar thing with Jack Campbell, like the type of teams that I was playing in the Big Ten West. Like, you might look like you're not the most physical player, but you're playing the most physical version of football, per like age group that there is, obviously NFL more, pound for pound, but like they're just not doing what they're doing in that conference. So, I thought for what it was as a first game, it was really good. I think the Lions got him involved. And I think this is a guy that you see kind of similarly, not like to Bijan's level of impact, but like getting more involved in the offense as time goes on. And I do think you're right, Max. I think he's a guy that, will at the very least replace Hawkinson long-term for the Lions, who I think is having a better time in Minnesota than he ever was in Detroit right now. So the ceiling for this guy could be higher. But it's very hard to read with tight ends because, as we've seen, sometimes these guys take year 5 jumps that are just incredible. So,
yeah, for sure. I mean, they are longer developing. So how do you feel about, I guess we can talk a little bit about the selection of Kincaid because he's the only tight end who went higher than Laporta in the draft. So, one was featured in the season opener and one was featured on Monday night opener. And, both were involved. So how did you feel about the Bills deciding to go with Kincaid over Laporta?
I mean, I was personally a fan. I was fine with either of them. I was really a fan of both of these guys. I know Kincaid is probably more of a developed receiver now than Laporta is, despite Laporta being a converted receiver. However, I was never a fan of Kincaid's blocking, whereas I saw some highlights with Laporta's that being a converted guy and going from receiver to blocking defensive ends in the Big Ten, it's a big jump to ask for any guy. And I'm, just to stick with him for a second, the fact that the Lions drafted him, a team that wants to run the ball as much as they do, and invested in 2 running backs, whether it was a big contract or a high draft pick, and then having him be their tight end replacement, eventually to be their all-time starter. It really speaks of what they thought of what his blocking abilities, how far they've come, and what they could possibly become. As far as Kincaid, the way the Bills' offense right now, it was very much out of sync on Monday night, where they were, that's a different conversation to have with how stuff went down that night when it came to the offensive side of the ball. But with Kincaid's game specifically, being the one tight end drafted above Laporta, I feel like he played well. And I was excited to see how he was going to fit in this offense, especially because the Bills didn't bring in another slot option to really contend with or replace that production they got from Isaiah McKenzie over the middle. They brought in Deontay Hardy that was going to be able to take away those gimmick touch sides of it. And Trent Sherfield is more of a, traditional receiving type guy, but I don't think he gives that kind of pop or the abilities, the upside that Kincaid brought. So they were probably looking to use him more as like a slot receiver than a true tight end. So when they're looking at tight ends that were drafted, it's kind of hard to evaluate Kincaid versus Laporta because I feel like Laporta is going to get more opportunities to be a traditional type of tight end in the Detroit offense, where Kincaid is going to be more of that receiving type option. And while he did perform decently enough, I feel like he's going to be worked in more often later in the season than he was Monday night and even moving forward after this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to have many takes post week 1 that are anything other than positive, just because I really don't think we know much yet. And I think that kind of factors into this discussion. I love that Buffalo took a swing with the tight end, but I think their offense as a whole just wasn't good week 1. And so we can't really say much about how that affected Kincaid.
Yeah.
Maybe they
being
go out
negative in any way is just an overreaction on every level, right? So we can talk about flashes that we see, trajectory that we can imagine. That's definitely true.
Yeah, that would be my take with him. Is I think we will see it eventually. I don't really know what the Bills' plan is yet to be different than they've been in the past. Is my if I were to have a concern, but that's because they played the Jets. They have a great defense. Like it's just
Right.
it's silly. Like we could come up with reasons for any team why like we thought week 1 wasn't exactly what it should have been, but there are games where good teams played poorly and they played bad teams who played well and they still won. And the takeaway is difficult to see because people didn't watch the game a whole lot. It's like
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to talk more about the Bills offense another time as we are getting close to the kickoff for Thursday night football. So at this point, we're going to say bye to Owen. Thanks so much, man, for coming on and talking rookies with us. We'll see you again soon. I hope you can find Owen's written work over at defianttakesfootball.com as well as his own podcast and YouTube channel at The Weekly Huddle. So, Owen, thanks again.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Owen.
All right. It is time to pick Vikings versus Eagles. So one came out of week 1, 1-0. One came out 0-1. The expectation was the Eagles would beat the Patriots soundly. I wouldn't say that happened, but I also would say that probably shouldn't have been the expectation, right? The Patriots offense is a whole lot better, and they have one of the best schemed and run defenses in the NFL. Whereas the Buccaneers were expected to be, a bottom feeder, and maybe they will be by season's end, but they're not going to just show up and not even try, right? And they also have a very good defense. And the Vikings, they lost some talent, and while they added some offensive firepower with Addison, they lost some key players in free agency as well. So what were your thoughts on just how each of those teams performed in their very first outing?
Yeah, so I thought the Vikings game, which I watched a good amount of because one of my friends is a big Vikings fan, who's watching it next to me, was very similar to my Washington team's game, and that they looked like clearly the better team on the field. And that's not a diss at Tampa. I think Tampa has some talent on the field, and I think we probably have underestimated the amount of talent they have coming into the season, especially defensively. But the Vikings moved the ball well. They shut down the opposing offense for the most part outside of a couple big plays and just shot themselves in the foot and lost because of it. And that's the NFL, baby. It happens. And because it's week 1, we're going to be like, oh no, are they going to be 4-12? It's just silly. The Vikings are fine. They might be a playoff team again this year. They might regress to being a 7-win team. I don't know what to tell you. We haven't seen it yet. In the Eagles case, I think I'm not concerned about them, but they didn't come out punching the way they did last year, and it's too early again to say that they're not going to be the same team they were the year before because they're way too talented, but their offensive line didn't really bully the Patriots. They didn't really run the ball up and down the field the way they used to. We didn't really see kind of the RPOs just put, safeties and linebackers in an absolute tizzy the way it normally does. But defensively, they got some big plays that helped them get out to a big lead early on. And they were able to hold on because they're a veteran football team who doesn't panic and did just enough to kind of pull it out in a road environment that's difficult to play in. The Patriots are a good football team, and I don't think played their best, but they played 2 quarters of really good football, which was enough to put an Eagles team that was kind of lacking in a bit of a difficult spot. And they had to play a close game on the road early on. And that's not a bad thing for a team that's trying to grow towards being a Super Bowl contender again. It's not bad for any of these teams for these things to happen. Maybe the Vikings losing is bad for their long-term aspirations standings wise. But, ultimately I think they look at that and they go, yes, we lost to Tampa Bay. Is this an unwinnable game for Minnesota? I don't think it is. I wouldn't pick them to win. But I do think that they might cover this number because I think that they're not worse than the Buccaneers, right? They just had a bad game.
Right. I think I'm going to go ahead and agree with you. I think the Eagles will walk away with this, but I don't think they're going to win by more than a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. I think it's the fact that it's a short week. Thursday nights are unpredictable. Ultimately, it could get out of hand, but they have the ability to score very quickly, right? This we know. Justin Jefferson has been doing it for literally years on end at this point. He can take them up and down the field essentially by himself. And Jordan Addison is a really nice piece to go along with that. They also have Hawkinson and Madison, who I don't think is a super dynamic player, but he's a viable starting running back. And their offensive line is, I think, a little questionable on the interior, but I don't think it's something that's an obvious major flaw, right? It's not something that's immediately just going to be a problem from the first snap and they're just going to dissipate. So they'll have opportunities to score. And when you have that, I never really like to pick against those teams covering large spreads. So just from that perspective, it makes sense to me. I don't think they have enough on the defensive side of the ball to come out and win this game, especially with such a proven team like the Eagles, who still have the majority of their pieces from last year and did win a challenging game on the road. Now they get to go home. It's a short week, right? They are a physical team up front on both sides of the ball. There's a lot of trust there for me in terms of what they can do. So when the game's over, I do think they will be 2-0, and I do think the Vikings will be 0-2. But I think that, I'm actually very high on the trajectory of the Vikings organization right now, particularly their head coach. I think that he I don't want to put anything so definitive out there, but I do think there's a good chance that he has that it factor as a head coach. And I think their brain trust is intelligent enough to know that they were good last year, and that's a good thing, but they didn't overvalue the success that they had. And they essentially are like, we're okay with taking a small step back, not doubling down on any contracts that we don't think are going to help us long term. And if we do win a few less games, then we're not going to freak out because we have the faith of ownership and the fan base. And we know that the offense is important. And so we're going to continue to build that up and then do the defense maybe a little bit more gradually. But that might not look super pretty right away. And I think on this Thursday night, it's might not look pretty on defense.
Yeah, and you can be afraid here, line wise, like of the Eagles. They're at home; it's their first home game. They come back, raucous crowd. Like they have the potential to just light up the scoreboard, right? That to me would be impressive. Now they're like the best team in football, probably at their best. So it wouldn't surprise me, but it would be impressive to me if they flipped it, like right on their heads from what they did last week and came out here on 4 days rest and just scored like 40 points. But it's possible. I think Minnesota's defense looks improved, especially up front from what it was last year in terms of just gap discipline. I think like they had pass rush last year, but I think this against Tampa Bay, like they looked like they were more capable of containing, a quarterback that's not the most mobile, but is capable of getting outside the pocket in Baker Mayfield. But it's not time for them to panic in any capacity, despite losing that game. And I honestly, this is not going to be a take you ever hear on any like major network at all. But what's a more important long-term outcome for the Vikings, right? Winning that game or Jordan Addison looking really good week one? Because I think it's the latter by a good margin, because having him being, an immediate impact receiver is an upgrade over Adam Thielen last year.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And you can think about it any which way you want, but I think if you are realistic about it, there's a very real chance that Kirk Cousins isn't going to be the guy for them going forward. Mm-hmm. So if we think that, they're going to be adding a rookie more likely than not, or maybe searching elsewhere. I don't know the answer to that. But if you are moving on, what better of a situation to insert a new quarterback to than two dynamic receivers, a really solid tight end, and a decent offensive line, right? And then again, the defense can kind of follow that. But even if it is Kirk, like that development, I think is going to be really helpful, beneficial. Do I suspect that's the most likely outcome? No, not really. But I think we are right up against the kickoff. So that's going to do it for us. Thanks for joining us here at the Defiant Takes Football Primetime Preview. You can find me at DMaxDean. You can find Nick at Nick with Sports. You can find Defiant Take Football at Defiant Takes FB. Of course, check out all of our written work over at defianttakesfootball.com, and be sure to check back after the game for our recap and then our AI game picks, as well as some fantasy talk with Matthew Brown. All right, y'all. Appreciate you very much.
Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.